Hi friends, Angelica here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have a fun project to share with you. I cased a card that I made 3 years ago, and the card that I made 3 years ago, I actually cased from another crafter. I'll get into that circle in just a moment. Let's first start with this background stamp. This is IO Stamps Layered Pansies. It's a red rubber background stamp that's 5 3/4 square, and it makes the daintiest pansies. I absolutely adore it. This is actually the second background stamp I ever bought. I've already stamped and white heat embossed several panels of Canson XL watercolor paper off screen with the stamp, and now I'm coloring them with Zig clean color real brush markers, just like I did with my first card 3 years ago. Now, if you're not familiar with these markers, I will say they're a lot of fun to use. I mainly use them to do this sort of a background technique. I'll be honest though, I actually hadn't pulled them out in almost a year, so it was really good to have them out on my desk. I don't do much coloring with them since they can fade pretty quickly, especially if they're going to be exposed to the sun, but they are so fun to do techniques like this with. These markers are so vibrant. They're filled with a water-based dye ink, so you can blend the colors out with a water brush or with another marker, another Zig marker. Using another marker gives you even more vibrant colors really quickly. The dye inks, they stay wet for a while, so you can use them on crafting projects, preferably using watercolor paper, or they're really good on Bristol smooth paper too. So right now I'm quickly coloring small areas of the flowers with the pens. I'm starting with a brighter color, coloring in a circle towards the center of each flower, and then I'm blending it out a little bit with a lighter color. I have this video sped up, but I really am coloring quickly. I want to get as much of the panel done as I can before any of the ink dries. I'm not doing any special coloring techniques. I'm just trying to get colored down on the paper. Now, once I'm done, I'm going to heavily spray the panel with water and then set the panel aside to let the water move the ink around organically. For the second panel, I picked a cooler palette to color with. This palette was definitely inspired by my mother-in-law, who's obsessed with the color purple. I also picked some blues and turquoise too, just to break that purple up a little bit. These colors are much more vibrant than the warmer colors from the first panel, especially the purples. My original card was inspired by a card I had seen online. I believe it was Pinterest, but it could have been on Facebook, like in Stamp Junkies or one of the card making groups. The card was made by Michelle Lupton, and that card cost me a lot of money because, of course, I had to buy the stamp and I had to buy the whole set of markers. And how does that card maker saying go? Why buy a card when you can make it for $100? Right. So Michelle colored her panel with pastel Zig markers. It was just so pretty, really romantic. The technique seemed really easy to do. She did spray her panel with water that had perfect pearls mixed into it, which gave her paper an iridescent look. I didn't realize that until I went on the hunt for her card on Pinterest a few days ago, and it linked me to her blog, so I was able to read what she did. And that blog post was dated March 2018. So I made my card in April of 2018. So that is, yeah, that is literally 3 years ago. Getting back to the project, I have the second panel now sitting off to the side, and I brought my first panel back up. I'm going to do a few things to it. First, I'm breaking up the ink and water. They pull together on top of the paper because of the paper I'm using, and I'll talk about that in a moment. I'm also dropping in color to spots I missed when I was coloring. I added ink to an acrylic block, and I'm using my paintbrush to add the color into the blank areas. If there's too much ink in one area and not enough ink in another area, I'm also using my paintbrush to pick up the ink from the more from the darker area and taking it over to where there needs to be more color. And lastly, I'm also using my brush to soak up pooled water. When you spray the paper, it buckles a little bit and creates little hills, I guess you could say. Most paper does that when you spray it or add a lot of water to it. With the flowers being embossed, these embossed lines act like little walls, and the water and ink will pool at the lowest areas of each petal. And I don't want the ink to end up there when the water dries. Now, this is a step you definitely don't have to do. You can just add a lot of ink to your dry panel, spray it, let the panel dry, and be done with the project. That's what I did with my card 3 years ago. But I want to elevate that design concept. I don't want the harsh water lines my card from 3 years ago had. I want vibrant colors, but I don't want them mixing too much together like my first card too. The blues went over the embossed lines and mixed in with the greens, and the greens mixed in with the purples. And this time around, I'm going to manipulate the inks. I gave them about 5 minutes to do their own thing when they were set aside. And now I'm helping the inks get into position with my paintbrush. And I gotta say, this is really relaxing. I completely just zoned in on this project and the time flew by. You can see I'm lifting the board up periodically. I'm using the light to see if there's still pooled water areas. If I get a big reflection and not a sheen, I quickly touch that area with my brush. And I'm also wiping my brush on a paper towel I'm holding in my other hand. The reason I'm so adamant about picking up any pooled water is because I'm going to dry the panel with my heat tool, and pooled water will most definitely leave water lines behind. And even sheen is fine, but water still sitting on the surface is still holding ink and needs to be picked up to avoid those lines. I know I keep talking about the water lines, but this is one thing I try to avoid in all of my watercolor work. And by leaving no water behind is what keeps those lines away. If I can't let my panels dry naturally, I use my heat tool to dry them when they're slightly damp. When I'm painting, that's easy since I'm controlling the water with my brush. Spraying a panel heavily with water is completely different. So picking up the pooled water is also speeding up the drying process. And I want to get these panels dry because I'm going to give them one more layer of color to just really brighten them up. Adding the second layer of color is going to be a lot easier since all I have to do now is color over the same colors. Now, my biggest tip on adding a second layer after using a heat tool is let your panel completely cool down before starting. I know that seems to be common sense, but when you're in the moment, it's so easy to put the heat tool down and get right back to work. And if your paper's still warm, guess what? The ink is going to dry and your project isn't going to look that good. You can reactivate these inks, but they're going to stain your project and you're not going to be able to lift that stain. You'll just be able to move some of the color. So dry your panel and take a break. I give my paper and the board about 5 minutes to cool down. Now through the magic of video editing, I get to just breeze on to the next step. But in reality, I actually went upstairs and made a yummy drink. Okay, about the paper. Canson XL is a student grade watercolor paper. It's made of wood pulp. So the paper handles pigments differently than a 100% cotton watercolor paper. Cotton paper soaks up water and pigments wonderfully, almost instantly, like a sponge. This paper needs time for pigments to soak into it. At least that's been my observation. For the first few minutes, pigments seem to just kind of sit on top of the paper. I do like this paper and I always have some in stock in my craft room, but I don't watercolor on it. I use it for techniques like this or die cuts I want to watercolor. Pigment powders are also fun to use on this paper. So it does have a purpose for me in my craft room. I just do not paint on it. I buy a pack with a coupon. It probably costs me around $6 to $10. And that pack is going to last me for at least a year, if not longer. Believe there's 20 sheets in a pack. The papers are 9 by 12. So each paper I get 4 6 by 4.5 inch size panels. I actually can't even remember when I bought this paper pack. I am down to 2 sheets, so it is time to go and get more. Okay, so you can see I am doing the same exact steps again as I did at the beginning of the project, using my paintbrush to pick up pooled water, help move the inks. If there's more ink in one area and less ink in another area, I'm picking up that ink to add to the lighter areas. Now, once I finished these 2 panels, I decided to make a few more panels. So I ended up with 7 panels altogether. I spent a whole evening just painting pansies. 4 years ago, I was pregnant, and the baby shower was here at our house. And I bought a box of 30 clipboards so we can use them when playing the baby shower games. And then I never got rid of the clipboards. So now I get to use them with my crafting projects, which is perfect, especially since I like to watercolor a lot. So making 5 more panels was super easy because I have a lot of clipboards. So I was able to just keep those boards rotating. Since I had all of the product out already, making these panels, the stamp, the embossing ink, I used VersaMark, I used Alabaster white embossing powder by Brutus Monroe. I had the markers out, just everything. So I thought, why not just get some more panels done, and then I'll have extra cards in my stash. Making these two panels took me about an hour. Making the extra 5 panels took me about an hour and a half. That's how convenient it is to have so many boards. I'm not saying go out and buy 30 clipboards. I'm just saying that if I didn't have those clipboards, I probably wouldn't have made more panels. I do love making lots, like a lot of cards. Then if I need a quick gift, I have a whole set of cards already made I can give away. I give a lot of cards to my mother-in-law or to my stepmom, so they're always fully stocked with handmade cards to mail out to their friends and family. And one last thing about my pregnancy, going back 4 years ago, having a baby at 40 is completely different than having a baby at 25. I will tell you that now. But it's because of my daughter that I'm now a crafter. I left my job to stay at home with the baby and found crafting videos on YouTube, and wouldn't you know, I just started buying product and started stamping. It did take me a little while to fork out that $60 for my first MISTI, which is why I was pretty late to the background stamp game. Moving on to the next step, I pulled out another oldie but goodie product, these mini butterflies by Tim Holtz. They're Sizzix Thinlit dies. And now I'm going through my glitter paper to pick out paper that's going to match the colors of the panel. I want the butterflies to be glitter on the top. They are layered butterflies. The top is detailed and the bottom is solid. So the bottom's going to be vellum I'm using this Tailored Expressions heavyweight vellum, and I mean this is heavyweight vellum, 65 pound. I love it. The top layer of the butterflies, like I said, are detailed, and there is a lot of paper to poke out. I do have the Sizzix brush that you can brush over your intricate dies to poke out all the pieces, but I just didn't want to damage the glitter paper at all. I didn't think the glitter would come off the paper. It's more of a delicate paper, so I just poked them out with my paper poker, and now I'm using multimedia matte Ranger to glue the butterfly to the vellum. And for the sentiments, I already stamped them off screen. I used Tiny Words by Simon Says Stamp, and I stamped them in lines so I can use the long sentiment strips, also by Simon Says Stamp, to die cut all of them together. I used my L-shaped ruler from My Sweet Petunia Creative Corners that matches the MISTI, to make sure those little teeny sentiment stamps were positioned straight in my MISTI before I stamped them. I did 2 lines of sentiments. I stamped them, and then I turned the panel over and stamped them again. I didn't need all of the sentiments. I just put them back in the envelope, so I have sentiments stamped for the next time I want to use them. The sentiments I stamped for the purple cards, I used a black ink, and then the sentiments that were stamped for the pink cards, I heat embossed them with gold embossing powder. I attached all the panels to card bases with craft foam cut just a little smaller than the panels and score tape. And now I'm going to add the butterflies, again using the multimedia matte as the adhesive. It is a really strong adhesive, and since the embossing lines and the vellum would probably have a hard time connecting, which is regular glue, I picked the multimedia matte. Now, it is very slippery at first when you put the butterfly on, so I'm putting just heavy weights on top of the butterfly for a couple minutes to really push that glue down into the panel. When I did the other panels, I just put my MISTI on top of them. I use my MISTI a lot as a weight when I need to weigh down glued projects. I'm now adding the sentiments that I die cut off screen. I'm using mini or thin foam squares that I cut into small strips to give the sentiments some height. But before I add them to the panels, I am putting a little bit of glue on them, so I have a little bit of wiggle room to make sure that I put the sentiments on the panel straight. I have the tendency of putting on sentiments crooked, so that glue just gives me a little bit of wiggle room to work with. I'm adding my last sentiment using my Tim Holtz design ruler to make sure I'm centering that sentiment properly. And I'm going to be finished with my project. So let me share with you my original cards that I made 3 years ago. This is my blue and green palette, and then red and pink. And my last one is with the butterfly. Same exact glitter paper too. I love how the updated cards turned out, especially that really soft pink and yellow panel. So pretty. Perfect with the gold and rose glitter paper that I picked to go with it. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I hope I was able to share some ideas with you. If you liked what you saw, please give me a thumbs up. And if you want to see more, be sure to subscribe before you leave. I'll be back shortly with another video, so I'll see you then.